Open the hunger principle and meet the truth. Your forbidden wants are not weaknesses, but instruments. Forbidden desire will be your manual for refining hunger into a creative force because, as you'll discover, desire creates reality. Keep listening if you are ready to wield that power with skill and care. The hunger principle. You didn't arrive here by accident. Certain pages find certain souls. If this book found you, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm giving away a free physical copy of this book, packed with ancient wisdom and timeless insight. The details are in the pinned comment, so don't forget to check it out. Introduction. Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun paint the morning sky in hues of amber and rose. For 20 years, she had followed the same routine: wake up, suppress her dreams, go to work, come home. Society had taught her that desire was something to be tamed, controlled, even crushed. But on this particular morning, something shifted within her. Like most people, she had been conditioned to view desire as a weakness, a distraction from duty and responsibility. The previous evening, while cleaning out her attic, she discovered a journal from her college years. Page after page burst with ambitions, creative ventures, and bold plans that made her heart race even now. What had happened to that fire? The truth is that desire isn't your enemy, it's your compass. When properly understood and channeled, desire becomes the most powerful force for positive transformation in your life. But this requires a fundamental shift in how you perceive and work with your desires. Think of desire as a sophisticated instrument, much like a compass that not only points north but can be calibrated to guide you through the complete landscape of your potential. The problem isn't that you want too much. It's that you haven't learned to work with want itself. This journey begins with 4 essential elements: attention, feeling, boundary, and ritual. Your attention determines what you feed with your energy. Your feeling provides the vital force that brings intentions to life. Boundaries create the container that transforms raw wanting into purposeful action. And ritual gives you the practical framework to make this work consistent and powerful. But transformation requires more than theory. It demands practice. Consider how an athlete trains their body or a musician refines their craft. Your desires require the same dedicated cultivation. This isn't about indulgence, it's about mastery. When you learn to work with desire skillfully, you discover that what you truly want often aligns perfectly with what the world needs from you. The ethical foundation of this work is crucial: claim without harm. This means pursuing your desires while remaining conscious of their impact on others and the wider world. True fulfillment never comes at the expense of others' well-being. Your nervous system holds the patterns of every no you've ever internalized, every dream you've been told to abandon. But just as your system learned to contract, it can learn to expand. Through the practices in this book, you'll discover how to release old constraints and wire in new possibilities. This isn't another self-help manual asking you to positive think your way to success. Instead, it's a practical guide to transforming desire from a source of frustration into a reliable tool for creation. The chapters ahead will walk you through specific techniques too. The path ahead isn't about suppressing or indulging desire, it's about mastering it. Part 1. The Stirring, Awakening Your Want. Chapter 1. The Hidden Flame. The midnight air hung thick with the scent of fermenting dough as Clarence stood in the empty cafe kitchen, his hands dusted with flour. The 13th attempt at his grandmother's sourdough recipe sat before him. Each previous loaf had been edible, some even quite good by most standards. But something was missing, that indefinable quality that made his grandmother's bread taste like love itself. His co-worker Marcus had left hours ago, suggesting he just serve what he had. "Nobody will know the difference," Marcus had said. But Clarence knew. The ember inside him wouldn't let him settle. As he folded the dough for the 14th time that night, his movements were precise, measured. The starter, the temperature, the timing, everything had to align perfectly. This wasn't about perfection for its own sake. This was about honoring something deeper, a truth his hands remembered even if his mind couldn't quite grasp it. The first light of dawn was breaking when Clarence finally pulled a loaf from the oven that made his heart sing. The crust crackled just right under his fingers. The crumb had that perfect elasticity he remembered from childhood mornings. This was it. This was what wouldn't let him rest. When Sarah, the first customer of the day, arrived looking worn and defeated, Clarence offered her a slice of the still warm bread. She paused mid-bite, her eyes widening. "This tastes like my mother's kitchen," she whispered, tears welling up. "I haven't felt this held in years." That persistent ember in Clarence, the one that demanded excellence, that wouldn't be silenced by convenience or compromise, had reached out and touched another soul. His insistence on getting it right wasn't perfectionism. It was a faculty of the heart, a knowing that recognizes true nourishment. This ember burns in everyone, though years of good enough and don't make waves often bury it beneath layers of accommodation. Society teaches us to mistake this sacred discernment for pickiness or pride. We learn to silence the voice that says, "Not quite," and "something's missing here." But that voice is a compass. When we feel that quiet dissatisfaction, that subtle knowing that there's something more authentic waiting to emerge, we're encountering our soul's own quality control system. The key is learning to distinguish between this genuine inner calling and the echoes of social expectations or perfectionist conditioning. The practice, the 7 morning names. For the next 7 mornings, immediately upon waking, before your feet touch the floor, speak aloud one thing you truly want. Not what you should want or what others expect you to want, but what calls to you with that same quiet insistence that kept Clarence at his bread. Notice how your body responds, the subtle sensations that arise as you voice this desire. Pay attention to which wants create expansion in your chest, which bring tension to your shoulders, which kindle that ember in your belly. This somatic signature becomes your first dictionary for translating between your soul's language and your conscious mind. Chapter 2. Naming the Hunger. Mabel sat in her 37th staff meeting, watching her colleagues' eyes glaze over as she presented her after-school mentorship program for the 3rd time. Each presentation had been met with polite nods and vague, maybe next semester responses. But something felt different today. Instead of her usual passionate but meandering pitch about helping struggling students and building community, she had distilled her vision into a single, crystal-clear sentence. "I will create a twice-weekly after-school program where senior students mentor freshmen in study skills and life navigation, measuring success through improved grades and attendance." The shift was subtle but profound. Principal Roberts leaned forward, asking specific questions about implementation. The math department head offered classroom space. By meeting's end, Mabel had 3 volunteer teachers and a pilot program scheduled for next month. This transformation illuminates a fundamental truth about desire. Precision acts as a lens, focusing scattered light into a powerful beam. Vague wanting diffuses through the universe like radio static, but clearly articulated desire cuts through the noise like a signal locked onto its frequency. To convert fuzzy longing into focused intention, apply these 3 questions. What specifically do you want to create? How will it materially manifest? What measurable change will indicate success? This framework transforms "I want to help people" into "I will launch a weekly workshop teaching financial literacy to single parents, measuring impact through participants' debt reduction and savings growth." 2 months later, Mabel watched as her pilot program unfolded. What began as 6 seniors mentoring struggling freshmen had organically grown to 15 pairs. Teachers reported improved classroom engagement, while attendance records showed a 27% reduction in tardiness among participating freshmen. The power lay not in the original idea's merit, which had always been there, but in its precise articulation. Each clear statement acted as a blueprint that reality could follow, like a master craftsman working from detailed plans rather than a vague concept. The practice, 10 days of precision. For the next 10 days, take your deepest want and refine it into a single, specific sentence. Write this sentence in your journal each morning, noting how it lands in your body. Does it feel heavy or light? Does it create expansion or contraction? Pay attention to how the sentence evolves as you refine it. Watch for small external signs that your clarified desire is being received. Unexpected conversations, relevant opportunities, subtle shifts in your environment. Let these responses guide further refinement of your statement until it rings absolutely true. Chapter 3. Forbidden and Framed. Walter gripped his steering wheel, ferrying passengers across the city while stealing glances at the sketchbook hidden beneath his seat. For 15 years he had confined his art to secret moments between rides, his father's words echoing in his mind. Art is for dreamers. Our family builds things that last. Each time a passenger commented on his careful route selection or smooth driving, Walter felt the weight of unspoken words. His true passion lay in the urban sketches he created during break times, quick captures of city life that made the mundane magnificent. But ancestral expectations had branded artistic pursuits as frivolous, selfish, even shameful. The roots of such silencing run deep. Cultural scripts embed themselves in our psyche through generations of well-meaning guidance. A mother's cautionary tale about the struggling artist next door. A grandfather's proud recitation of the family's builder legacy. Each story and warning weaves into a tapestry of limitation, marking certain desires as forbidden territory. These inherited boundaries often masquerade as wisdom, protection, or duty. Yet beneath each practical directive lies a complex history of survival strategies, ancestral fears, and unresolved dreams. Understanding this allows us to honor our lineage while gently questioning its constraints. One rainy afternoon, Walter found himself waiting for a passenger outside a busy cafe. Almost without thinking, he began sketching the scene. Umbrellas bobbing, steam rising from coffee cups, faces illuminated by window light. A young woman peered over his shoulder and gasped. "This is extraordinary," she said. "You've captured exactly how it feels to seek shelter from the rain." Walter's first instinct was to hide the sketch, but something made him pause. "Thank you," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been drawing secretly for years." "The world needs more beauty," she said, leaving him with her card. She curated for a local gallery. This moment revealed how shame dissolves in the light of authentic appreciation. The very act he had been taught to dismiss as impractical had created a genuine human connection. To release the grip of inherited limitations, we must first acknowledge their source with compassion. These constraints were often born of love, of parents and grandparents who wished to spare us struggle. By understanding this, we can begin to distinguish between their fears and our truths. The practice. Take a quiet moment with your journal. Write down your deepest desire, the one that makes you hesitate to speak it aloud. Then trace back to the first time you learned this desire was wrong or impractical. Who told you? What were their circumstances? What fears might have shaped their warning? Write without judgment, allowing understanding to soften the edges of old restrictions. Chapter 4. The Mirror of Longing. Agnes adjusted the pillow beneath Mr. Chen's head, noticing how his eyes followed the birds outside his hospice window. After 30 years of tending to the dying, she had learned to read the unspoken language of final wishes. Mr. Chen's gaze held more than just casual interest. It carried the weight of regret. "I used to paint birds," he whispered, his voice thin as tissue paper. "Had a whole collection of watercolors in my youth, but my family needed me in the restaurant business." Agnes felt her heart constrict. In his words, she heard an echo of her own abandoned passion, the violin that now gathered dust in her closet. Each evening she would pass by music schools on her way home, the sound of practice rooms calling to her like distant bells. When we encounter others' unfulfilled dreams, they often illuminate the spaces within ourselves where desire has been carefully packed away. These moments of recognition serve as mirrors, reflecting back our own deferred longings with startling clarity. That afternoon, Agnes brought Mr. Chen a small set of watercolors and a pad of paper. His trembling hands found strength as he created delicate brush strokes, bringing a sparrow to life on the page. The joy in his eyes sparked something in Agnes, a remembrance of how it felt to draw the bow across strings, to let music flow through her like a clear stream. That evening, she opened her violin case for the first time in years. The instrument's familiar weight in her hands spoke of patience, of dreams that wait quietly but never truly fade. She played a simple scale, then another, each note carrying the permission she had witnessed in Mr. Chen's last paintings. When we grant others the freedom to reclaim their passions, we often find ourselves granted the same liberation. Our forbidden wants are not random. They point to gifts we carry, talents that seek expression through us. The very act of witnessing another's courage can illuminate our path back to ourselves. The practice. Find a quiet space with a mirror. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Look into your own eyes and speak aloud the want you've kept hidden, perhaps even from yourself. Notice the sensations that arise, the catch in your throat, the warmth or coolness in your chest, the urge to look away or lean in. Record these physical responses without judgment, letting them inform you about where this desire lives in your body and what it might be asking of you. Chapter 5. The Law of Want. Harold stood at the wheel of the seaside ferry, his weathered hands resting lightly on the controls. After 30 years of crossing these waters, he had learned that timing meant everything. While other operators consulted tide charts and weather reports, Harold felt for something subtler, a whisper in the waves that spoke of hidden flows beneath the surface. Each morning, as the sun painted the harbor in gold, he would close his eyes and attune himself to the water's rhythm. There was always a perfect moment to depart, when the current aligned just so, creating an effortless glide that carried the ferry like a leaf on a stream. His passengers never knew why some crossings felt smoother than others, but Harold understood the secret. Attention, married to feeling, created its own kind of magic. This subtle alignment represents the foundational law of manifestation. Just as Harold reads the water's flow, you must learn to read the currents of possibility that surround your desires. When clear attention combines with aligned feeling, reality begins to organize itself around your intention. This isn't wishful thinking, it's practical navigation. The key lies in holding 3 elements in perfect balance: the crystal clear image of what you seek, the emotional resonance of already having it, and the quiet expectancy that allows it to manifest. Like a compass finding true north, this trinity of focus creates a natural pull toward your desired outcome. One foggy morning, Harold felt an unusual shift in the water's pattern. Instead of fighting against it, he adjusted his departure time by 7 minutes. What seemed like a minor change opened up an entirely new channel, one that cut the crossing time by 15 minutes and used less fuel. The harbor master called it luck, but Harold knew better. He had simply aligned himself with what was already possible. The practice. Each morning, sit in stillness for 10 breaths. Hold the image of your desire in your mind with crystal clarity, not as a future wish, but as a present reality. Match your feeling state to this image, allowing your body to experience the emotional texture of already having what you seek. Maintain this alignment for the full 10 breaths, treating it as a calibration of your internal compass. Like Harold reading the waters, you are learning to read and respond to the subtle currents of manifestation. This isn't about hoping or wishing. It's about steering. Just as Harold guides his ferry through invisible currents, you are learning to guide your life through the flows of possibility. Each breath becomes a moment of alignment, each feeling a subtle adjustment of your course. Chapter 6. Socratic Desire. Dorothy sat in the back room of the Millbrook Public Library, surrounded by stacks of new arrivals. While other librarians simply shelved books based on their summaries, she had developed a different approach. Each week, she would select 5 books and read them cover to cover, testing their impact before recommending them to specific patrons. One morning, she picked up a gardening manual that promised instant results. After reading it thoroughly, she set it aside. The techniques were flashy but unsustainable. Instead, she chose to feature an older book that taught patient cultivation and deep root systems. Her regular patrons had come to trust these carefully curated selections, knowing each recommendation emerged from genuine testing rather than impulse. This same principle of disciplined discernment applies to your desires. Like books that promise quick fixes, untested wants often lead to hollow outcomes. True transformation requires you to interrogate each desire, examining its roots and testing its substance. Through years of practice, Dorothy had developed 3 essential questions. Will this truly serve the community? What ongoing commitment does it require? Does it align with the library's deeper purpose? These questions transformed her recommendations from mere suggestions into instruments of genuine change. One spring, Dorothy felt drawn to start a children's reading program. Instead of rushing to implement the first version that came to mind, she applied her disciplined approach. She spent weeks refining the concept, testing different formats with small groups, and adjusting based on real feedback. What began as a vague impulse evolved into a structured program that eventually spread to libraries across the state. When a colleague asked how she had known it would work, Dorothy smiled and shared her secret. I didn't just want it. I tested it until it became true. Each desire that enters your awareness must undergo similar refinement. Through careful questioning, raw wanting transforms into focused intention. This isn't about dampening desire. It's about distilling it to its most potent form. The practice of, before acting on any significant desire, pause to apply these 3 questions. Purpose. What deeper truth does this desire serve? Look beyond surface, wants to understand the essential growth it offers. Price. What real commitment does this require? Calculate not just resources, but the full scope of energy and attention needed. Permission. Does this align with your authentic path? Check that the desire springs from genuine inspiration rather than reactive patterns. Sit with each question until you feel its full weight. Like Dorothy testing books before sharing them, let each desire prove its worth through patient examination. This practice turns fleeting wants into reliable instruments of transformation. Chapter 7. The Quiet Reckoning. Milton's fingers hovered over the dispatch console as the familiar crackle of emergency calls filled the room. For 15 years, he'd directed ambulances through the city's maze of streets, saving countless lives through his quick decisions and steady voice. But tonight, something felt different. The news of his mentor Robert's sudden passing had shaken him to his core. Robert, who had always encouraged Milton to pursue his dream of becoming a paramedic, was gone. "You have the instinct," Robert would say during their shared night shifts. "Don't let it go to waste." But Milton had stayed in dispatch, telling himself it was safer, more responsible. He had aging parents to support, bills to pay. The real truth, buried beneath layers of rationalization, was fear. fear of failing, of disappointing others, of changing too late in life. Through night shifts and countless emergencies, Milton had become expert at containing others' crises while his own dreams gathered dust. Each time he directed paramedics to a scene, a quiet voice whispered what could have been. The cost of this suppression manifested in subtle ways: tension, headaches, sleepless nights, a growing sense of disconnect from his work. The art of wanting requires recognizing when obligation has masked itself as duty. True calling persists beneath layers of should and must, waiting for acknowledgement. The energy spent maintaining these barriers could power transformation if properly redirected. 3 months after Robert's passing, Milton found himself filling out an EMT training application during his break. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple form, a small step toward reclaiming what he'd set aside. As he wrote his name, the familiar weight of guilt arose. But this time, instead of letting it stop him, he acknowledged it, contained it, and continued writing. That evening, something shifted in his work. His voice carried new authority over the radio, born not from years of experience, but from alignment with his truth. A young EMT later told him, "Your directions tonight helped us save someone in record time." Milton recognized that by honoring his own path, he had somehow become more effective at supporting others. The practice of containment and release. Find a quiet space and settle into your body. Name the shame or guilt that has held your desire captive. For 30 breaths, imagine this feeling as energy that can be safely contained, perhaps in a sphere of light or a sturdy vessel. Watch it without judgment. Then consciously redirect this same energy toward your authentic want, letting it fuel rather than hinder your path forward. Chapter 8. Symbols of Appetite. Beatrice ran her fingers across the bolt of fabric, tracing the pattern of intertwined roses and vines that seemed to dance beneath her touch. It was the 3rd time this week she'd encountered this exact motif, first in a dream, then on a vintage dress brought in for repairs, and now here in her supplier's new collection. After 20 years of crafting bespoke dresses in her small shop, she'd learned to pay attention to such recurring patterns. The roses weren't just flowers. They spoke of transformation, of beauty unfolding in its own time. Each time this pattern appeared, it came with a subtle nudge toward creating something new, not the careful reproductions of vintage designs she was known for, but something that merged past and present in an original way. For months, she'd been sketching a modern collection inspired by 1940s silhouettes, keeping the drawings hidden in her workroom. The rose pattern seemed to whisper that it was time to bring these designs into reality. In the quiet hours of her shop, surrounded by the gentle hum of her sewing machine, Beatrice began to understand that symbols were the universe's way of confirming our deepest desires. Working with a remnant of the rose fabric, Beatrice created a small sample piece, a collar that incorporated both vintage techniques and contemporary styling. She placed it on display without explanation, curious to see what would unfold. Later that week, a regular client, Mrs. Henderson, paused before the collar, touching it with unexpected reverence. "This is different from your usual work," she said, "but it reminds me of something my grandmother would have worn, made new again." Without hesitation, she commissioned a full dress incorporating the design. The universe speaks in patterns, in recurring images that catch our attention and guide us forward. These symbols are personal road signs, uniquely meaningful to each individual's journey. They appear in dreams, in daily life, in moments of synchronicity that seem too precise to be coincidence. By learning to read these signs, we develop a more intimate relationship with our own desires and their unfolding. Beatrice's story teaches us that symbols serve both as confirmation and invitation. They validate our inner knowing while gently nudging us toward action. The key lies in developing awareness of these patterns and having the courage to respond when they appear. The symbol awareness practice. For the next 2 weeks, maintain a daily log of recurring images, patterns, or symbols that catch your attention. Note where they appear, in dreams, daily life, or seemingly random encounters. Choose one recurring symbol and translate it into a small, concrete action. Pay attention to what unfolds when you engage with these signs actively rather than merely observing them. Chapter 9. The Pact with Self. Franklin's locksmith van was a marvel of organization, each pick, tension wrench, and cylinder in its designated spot, ready to serve his customers at a moment's notice. Yet in his own workshop, a battered chest of tools sat neglected, its lock growing stiffer by the day. For years, he'd meant to service his personal collection, the specialized tools passed down from his mentor, the ones that had built his reputation for handling the most challenging vintage locks. But client work always came first, and his own tools gathered dust. One evening, after turning down another complex job because his precision instruments needed maintenance, Franklin stood before the chest. He pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote, "I pledge to give 1 hour each morning to restoring my tools, starting with the chest's own lock. This is my craft's foundation and my legacy's guardian." He signed it, dated it, and placed it where he would see it first thing each day. The next morning, before checking his phone for service calls, Franklin honored his written commitment. He carefully disassembled the chest's lock, cleaning years of accumulated grime. The familiar motions of maintenance became a meditation, a daily ritual that grounded him before the day's demands. Within weeks, his restored tools allowed him to take on jobs he'd been declining. A museum curator heard of his revitalized expertise and sought him out for their antique lock collection. "These mechanisms sing under your touch," she observed, watching him work. "It's clear you care for your instruments." What Franklin discovered went beyond the practical benefits. The simple act of putting his commitment in writing had transformed a nagging should into a sacred practice. The signed covenant served as an anchor, holding him steady when urgent calls threatened to derail his morning routine. A written pledge carries power that mere intention lacks. It transforms desire from a wishful thought into a concrete agreement with oneself. When we commit our wants to paper and sign our name, we create a tangible bridge between yearning and action. This physical act of writing and signing engages both mind and body in the promise, making it harder to dismiss or defer. The covenant need not be grandiose. Its power lies not in flowery language, but in simple, specific commitments that can be honored daily. A written pledge creates infrastructure for desire, giving it a regular time and space to manifest. It converts vague somedays into precise nows. The covenant practice: create a simple, clear pledge to your desire. Write it by hand, sign and date it, and place it where you'll see it each morning. Read it aloud at dawn for 7 consecutive days, letting each reading renew your commitment to action. The pledge should be specific enough to guide behavior, but simple enough to sustain daily practice. Chapter 10. The Threshold of Permission. Ruby hesitated before placing the saffron on her corner store's shelf. The delicate threads, expensive and exotic for her small neighborhood market, seemed to whisper both possibility and risk. For 20 years, she'd stocked what everyone expected: basic spices, everyday necessities. But something in her knew her community was ready for more. She started small, displaying just 3 tiny jars next to the standard seasonings. The first customer who noticed was Mrs. Chen, who picked up a jar with surprised delight. "I used to cook with this back home," she said, "but I never expected to find it here." Ruby felt something unlock in her chest as she explained her decision to stock it. Within days, word spread. Customers lingered by the spice shelf, sharing recipes and memories. Ruby began keeping a notebook of their stories, each one affirming her subtle step toward transformation. When her supplier visited, she carefully ordered a few more jars, watching his eyebrows rise at this departure from her usual list. The core of permission lies not in grand declarations, but in small, intentional reveals that test the waters of acceptance. Like Ruby's careful placement of those first jars, each reveal creates space for feedback while maintaining clear boundaries. This graduated approach allows both you and others to adjust naturally to change. True permission unfolds in stages. First, the inner allowing that recognizes your right to want. Then, careful external tests that gauge response. Finally, clear boundaries that protect both your revelation and those affected by it. Each stage requires attention to consent, your own and others, ensuring transformation occurs at a pace that preserves trust and safety. 3 months later, Ruby's spice section had grown thoughtfully. A young chef from the new restaurant down the street became a regular, praising the quality of her selections. "I used to drive across town for these," he said, "but you've created something special here." His words reflected back to Ruby how her careful expansion had served not just her own desire for growth, but her community's unspoken hunger for something more. The power of permission lies not in a single moment of revelation, but in sustained practice. Small, consistent actions that gradually align outer expression with inner truth. Each step builds evidence that change can be both daring and safe, innovative and responsible. The permission practice. For 3 consecutive days, choose one small public way to acknowledge a harmless want. This might be mentioning a dream to a trusted friend, making a modest change to your environment, or taking a small step toward a goal. After each revelation, note both external responses and your internal sensations. Pay attention to what feels sustainable and what generates positive resonance. Part 2. The Crucible, Refining Forbidden Desire. Chapter 11. Alchemical Want. In the pre-dawn quiet of his small workshop, Amos carefully measured drops of elderberry extract into amber bottles. Each tincture required weeks of patient refinement, macerating the berries, straining the liquid, and allowing time to work its magic. Through years of practice, he had learned that potency came not from quantity, but from precise distillation. His customers often asked why he sold his remedies by the drop rather than the bottle. A single, pure drop contains more healing power than a gallon of crude mixture, he would explain, showing them how to carefully dispense the concentrated essence. Some walked away, seeking larger portions for lower prices, but those who understood the value of refinement returned again and again, marveling at how 3 drops could accomplish what spoonfuls of raw herb could not. One morning, a woman rushed in demanding a large bottle of his immune support tincture. Amos calmly explained his process, showing her the small vial. "But I need more than that," she insisted. "My whole family is getting sick." Gently, he placed 3 drops on her tongue. "Start here," he said. "Notice what happens when you work with concentration rather than volume." The core wisdom of transmutation lies in understanding that raw desire, like raw herbs, contains both medicine and overwhelm. Through careful refinement, removing excess, concentrating essence, establishing precise measure, we transform chaotic wanting into directed power. This process requires 3 elements: focused attention to separate signal from noise, consistent ritual to stabilize the extraction, and strong containment to preserve potency. 3 weeks later, the woman returned. "Those 3 drops did more than all the supplements I've tried," she said. "I understand now. It's about the quality of the medicine, not the quantity." Amos nodded, recognizing in her words the same lesson he had learned through years of patient distillation. The practice of distillation. For 7 consecutive evenings, sit in contemplation with your deepest want. Each night, work to compress its essence into a single crystal-clear sentence. Notice how the energy shifts as excess language falls away, leaving only the pure truth of your desire. Test each refinement against your body's wisdom. Does this version resonate with more or less power? Continue until you find the precise formulation that holds maximum potency in minimum form. Chapter 12. The Currency of Feeling. Ida moved through the neonatal intensive care unit with quiet grace, her steps measured and light. As she approached an incubator where a premature infant lay restless, she noticed the subtle tensions in the room. The mother's anxiety, the machine's steady beeping, the fluorescent glare. Instead of immediately checking vitals, she began humming an old lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The effect was immediate, yet gentle, like ripples spreading across still water. The baby's movements became less jarring, the mother's shoulders relaxed, and even the harsh lighting seemed to soften. Over her years in the NICU, Ida had discovered that feeling wasn't just an internal experience. It was a tangible force that could transform the environment. The way we feel shapes the reality we encounter. Just as a currency enables exchange in the marketplace, feeling is the medium through which desire manifests into experience. Each emotion carries a specific vibration, a unique frequency that attracts corresponding circumstances and possibilities. To manifest effectively requires learning to manage this emotional economy. Like a skilled banker, you must understand how to generate, store, and invest feeling energy wisely. Most people leak their emotional capital through worry, doubt, and unconscious reaction. But with practice, you can build reserves of powerful, purposeful feeling that magnetize your desires into being. The key lies in emotional hygiene. Regular practices that clear negative residue and cultivate chosen states. Through consistent, effective rehearsal, deliberately practicing the feeling of your desire fulfilled, you build the energetic foundation for manifestation. One evening, Ida found herself caring for twins born 8 weeks early. Their vital signs were concerning, and the parents were distraught. As she had done countless times before, she began her lullaby. But this time she consciously amplified the feeling of peace and well-being, letting it fill her entire being before allowing it to overflow into the room. Within minutes, the monitors showed improvement. The baby's oxygen levels stabilized, their heart rates regulated. The parents, who had been pacing anxiously, settled into chairs beside the incubators, their faces softening with hope. This isn't about mere mood manipulation. It's about understanding feeling as vital capital in the economy of manifestation. When you learn to generate and sustain specific emotional frequencies, you're literally creating the energetic currency that will purchase your desired experiences. The practice. For the next 21 days, maintain an emotional accounting log. Track 3 specific feelings related to your core desire. Record their intensity and duration each morning, afternoon, and evening. Additionally, spend 5 minutes every morning deliberately rehearsing the elevated emotional state associated with your desire fulfilled. Notice how this regular emotional investment begins to shift your daily experience. Chapter 13. Desire's Language. Silas walked the dim subway tunnels during his night shift, flashlight beams sweeping across the curved walls. Over 15 years of maintenance work, he'd seen countless tags and scrawls come and go. But lately, one symbol kept appearing, a simple spiral with 3 dots. At first, he dismissed it as random vandalism, but its persistent recurrence in specific locations caught his attention. Working methodically through his rounds, Silas began noticing a pattern. The spiral appeared near junctions where the old signal system needed upgrading, places where trains often had to slow unnecessarily. After seeing it for the 5th time, he started marking these locations in his work log. The body knows before the mind understands. Your deepest desires communicate through a subtle language of repetition. physical sensations, recurring phrases overheard in conversation, images that keep drawing your attention. These are not random coincidences, but precise coordinates guiding you toward alignment. Most people either ignore these signals or respond with desperate, oversized actions that dissipate the energy. The art lies in developing fluency, learning to notice, decode, and test these hints through small, strategic experiments. Think of desire's language as a gentle conversation rather than dramatic proclamations. It speaks through. When Silas finally mentioned the spiral pattern to his supervisor, she revealed that the signal upgrade project had been stalled for months due to unclear documentation of problem areas. His careful mapping of the graffiti locations provided exactly the data they needed. Within weeks, the upgrades began, significantly improving train flow through those sections. The key is responding with measured experiments rather than anxious leaps. When you notice a signal, test it with a small action. Let the results inform your next step. This builds a dialogue of trust between your conscious mind and desire's deeper intelligence. The practice. Create a signal notebook. For the next 2 weeks, record every repeated image, sensation, phrase, or attraction that catches your attention. Note the context and any patterns you observe. At the end of 2 weeks, choose the clearest signal and respond with one small concrete action. Document what unfolds. Chapter 14. Rituals of Thinning Doubt. Vera arrived at her laundromat each morning before sunrise, when the machine stood silent and the air held the crisp promise of a new day. After years of managing the busy establishment, she noticed how the staff's energy could scatter in 100 directions once the doors opened, leading to missed details, tension, and confusion that rippled through their service. One morning, she placed a small brass bell by the front counter. When her team arrived, she gathered them in a circle and rang it once, letting the pure tone fill the space. "Before we begin," she said softly, "let's take one breath together." The simple act created a moment of shared presence that changed everything. What seems like skepticism is often just habit, the mind's automated response to protect us from disappointment. But the body holds deeper wisdom. Through simple, consistent rituals, we can bypass mental resistance and anchor new patterns directly into our nervous system. The key lies in choosing actions that engage multiple senses: sound, breath, movement, touch. These create neural pathways that make belief tangible and accessible. When we perform these micro-ceremonies with presence rather than desperation, they become bridges between intention and manifestation. Each morning at 6:55 a.m., Vera's bell would ring. Staff members learned to pause, breathe together, and set an intention for the day ahead. Some initially rolled their eyes, but the ritual's simplicity and brevity made it easy to follow. There was no doctrine to debate, only a moment to center and connect. As weeks passed, something shifted. The morning bell became a natural part of their rhythm. Staff began arriving early to participate. The shared breath created a foundation of calm that sustained them through busy hours. Customers noticed the difference: the focused attention, the seamless coordination, the atmosphere of care. Then one day, a young woman who regularly used their services asked if they could add evening meditation classes in their waiting area. Others expressed interest in wellness workshops and community gatherings. The laundromat was becoming more than a place for clean clothes. It was emerging as a neighborhood anchor of mindful connection. Ritual provides the scaffolding that allows desire to take form. Like a trellis supporting a climbing vine, it creates structure without constriction. The key is consistency rather than complexity. Simple actions, repeated with presence, build pathways of possibility. The practice. Choose a 3-minute morning ritual to perform for 5 consecutive days. Begin with 3 conscious breaths. State your core intention in one clear sentence. Complete the sequence with a decisive physical gesture that anchors your commitment. perhaps touching your heart, raising your arms, or bowing gently. Let the brevity and simplicity work in your favor, creating a doable practice that builds trust between your conscious mind and deeper knowing. Chapter 15. The Work of Waiting. Night after night, Otis climbed the 100 steps to the lighthouse tower, carrying oil for the lamp that guided ships through treacherous waters. The fog could persist for weeks, turning days into an endless gray void. Yet he maintained his vigil with unwavering attention, polishing the glass, trimming the wick, and ensuring the beam cut through the densest mist. Some nights, when visibility dropped to mere feet, doubt would whisper that no one could see his light. But Otis understood that guidance worked whether witnessed or not. He had learned to hold his post with neither anxious pushing nor defeated collapse, but with the poised expectancy of one who knows service bears fruit in its season. This patience wasn't passive waiting, but active presence. Each morning he documented subtle signs of life on the waters, changes in bird patterns, shifts in the fog's density, the distant echo of horns. These tiny evidences reminded him that movement continued beneath apparent stillness. The art of patient tension requires this same quality of attention. Like a lighthouse keeper's vigil, desire asks us to maintain steady illumination without demanding immediate results. It's about cultivating the capacity to hold your vision with neither grasping nor resignation. One particularly thick month of fog tested even Otis's seasoned patience. Yet he continued his meticulous routine, cleaning, filling, lighting, recording. Then one dawn he heard an unfamiliar horn. Through the thinning mist emerged the silhouette of a tall ship he'd never seen before. Its captain had navigated the treacherous passage guided by the faithful beam, choosing this lighthouse's signal among many to mark a new trading route. That single ship changed everything. Regular visits established the port as a vital stop, bringing commerce and connection to the isolated coast. The months of seemingly futile vigil had been laying groundwork for an expansion no one could have predicted. This is how desire often works, through steady tending rather than forced timing. The key lies in maintaining what the lighthouse keeper knew, that service continues whether we see results or not, that tiny signs matter, that patience itself is a form of power. The practice. Begin a 21-day noticing log. Each day, record one small sign of movement related to your desire. A relevant conversation, a subtle shift in circumstance, an unexpected connection. Don't evaluate these signs, simply note them as a lighthouse keeper tracks changes in weather and waters. This practice builds your capacity for patient tension while training your attention to recognize the subtle ways your desire is already in motion. Chapter 16. The Shadow Bargain. Lillian sat at her desk, staring at the stack of reports demanding her attention. Her fingers twitched toward her bag where a leather-bound sketchbook lay hidden, untouched for months. As department manager at Meridian Solutions, she had climbed the corporate ladder through calculated steps and careful compromises. Each promotion came with silent agreements: less time for art, more hours at the office, trading creativity for security. One evening, reviewing quarterly projections, she noticed her hand unconsciously tracing patterns on the margin of a document. The simple act awakened something, a recognition of all the small bargains she'd made with fear. Taking the safe path meant arriving early, staying late, accepting endless meetings. Each yes to security whispered a quiet no to her artist's soul. The next morning, Lillian began cataloging these agreements. She listed every instance where fear of uncertainty had guided her choices, volunteering for committees she despised, taking on others' responsibilities, pushing her creative projects to someday. Each compromise appeared small in isolation, but together they formed chains that bound her energy and attention. Instead of dramatic gestures or resignation letters, Lillian chose to begin with a single reversal. She identified one meeting, a weekly status update that could be handled by email, and politely declined to attend. In that reclaimed hour, she opened her sketchbook. The simple act of drawing, even for just 60 minutes, felt like breathing after holding her breath underwater. Something shifted in that small rebellion. Her team didn't collapse without her constant presence. The sky didn't fall. Instead, she found herself more focused during the hours she did work, her creative energy beginning to flow back into her professional projects as well. Within a month, Lillian had renegotiated several of these fear-based agreements. She set firmer boundaries around her lunch hour, stopped checking emails on weekends, and dedicated early mornings to her art before the workday began. Each reversal required courage, but none demanded reckless abandonment of her responsibilities. This is the subtle art of reclaiming power from fear's bargains. It begins with recognition, seeing how compromise by compromise we trade our essential energy for imagined safety. But the path to restoration isn't through dramatic upheaval. It lies in careful cataloging and strategic reversal, one small agreement at a time. The practice. Create a shadow inventory. List 3 specific bargains you've made with fear, places where you've traded your deep desires for perceived security. Choose one bargain to reverse within the next 7 days. Make this reversal small enough to feel manageable but significant enough to reclaim real energy. Document the results, noting how this reclamation affects your core desire's vitality. Chapter 17. Boundaries of Want. Chester Martin had spent 15 years running the Oakwood Community Center, his calendar an endless stream of meetings, events, and crisis management. Each morning he arrived early to find notes slipped under his door, requests for just 5 minutes that inevitably stretched into hours. His own creative writing, once a daily practice, had dwindled to occasional late-night sessions when exhaustion clouded his mind. One afternoon, reviewing the center's schedule, Chester noticed how carefully he protected the children's art classes, never allowing interruptions or schedule changes to disrupt their creative time. Yet he hadn't offered his own creative work the same respect. That realization sparked a quiet revolution. Chester began blocking 2 hours each morning, arriving at 6 a.m. to write in his office before the center opened. He posted clear office hours on his door and scheduled specific times for drop-in conversations. When asked about emergencies, he created a simple triage system. True urgencies went to his assistant Maria, while everything else waited for designated meeting times. The first weeks felt uncomfortable. Some staff members pushed back, accustomed to unlimited access. Chester discovered that protecting his creative time required more than just scheduling. It demanded emotional boundaries as well. He learned to say, "I understand this matters to you, and we can discuss it during office hours tomorrow," without feeling guilty. As months passed, something remarkable emerged. Chester completed his first collection of short stories, writing steadily in those protected morning hours. More surprisingly, the community center ran more smoothly. Staff members became more resourceful, solving minor issues themselves rather than immediately seeking his intervention. His clearer boundaries had created space for others to grow. "I gave my creativity the same respect I'd always given our programs," Chester later explained to a colleague. "When I protected that space, everything else aligned around it." Through this transformation, Chester discovered that boundaries weren't walls that diminished connection. They were containers that amplified power. By clearly defining his creative time and emotional energy, he allowed his writing to mature without compromising his leadership. His boundaries became the very structure that supported both his art and his service. This holds a profound truth. Desire requires protection to flourish. Like a garden needs both sunlight and fencing, our deepest longings need both nourishment and clear boundaries to grow strong. When we learn to say no to energy drains, assign specific time to our priorities, and maintain emotional clarity, we create the conditions for desire to mature into tangible results. The practice. Create a boundary map of your time and energy. Draw a circle and divide it into sectors showing where your energy currently flows. Then draw a second circle showing your ideal distribution. Choose one key phrase like, "I'll address that during office hours," or "that time is already committed." Practice this phrase in a low-stakes conversation this week, noting how it feels to protect your creative space. Chapter 18. Desire in Action. Margot sat in her quiet apartment, a single candle flickering beside her birth support certification. For years, she had envisioned a holistic pregnancy preparation center, but the scale of that dream felt overwhelming. Each time she considered taking action, the enormity of startup costs and logistics paralyzed her into inaction. One evening, while supporting a particularly challenging birth, she noticed how she naturally broke down complex breathing techniques into tiny, manageable pieces for the laboring mother. "Just this breath," she would whisper, "just this moment." The mother's tension dissolved as she focused on these micro steps rather than the entire journey ahead. That experience sparked a revelation. Instead of fixating on her complete vision, Margot began teaching one small class in her living room. She cleared a corner, laid out 4 yoga mats, and invited expecting mothers for weekly breathing sessions. The intimacy of the small group allowed her to refine her teaching approach while building confidence. Each week she added one new element: a handout, a tea ceremony, a partner exercise. She never forced growth, instead letting each addition arise naturally from the need she observed. When participants asked for more, she expanded to 2 classes, then 3. Word spread through quiet recommendations rather than aggressive marketing. As her classes filled, a local yoga studio offered her space for weekend workshops. Rather than immediately accepting, Margot took time to feel into the timing. When it felt aligned, she made the transition, bringing her growing community with her. Her measured pace allowed deep roots to form. Within 18 months, what began as 4 mats in a living room had evolved into a comprehensive childbirth preparation program. Margot's gentle, stepwise approach had created something more sustainable than if she had rushed to manifest her complete vision at once. Each small action had honored both her calling and its natural timing. The core truth emerged. Refined desire thrives through calibrated action. When we break down our vision into small, committed steps, we create a pathway for manifestation that respects both our capacity and the organic timing of growth. Each micro step becomes a devotional act, serving the larger calling while building momentum through consistent, achievable progress. The practice. Design an inspired action plan with 3 non-negotiable steps to complete this week. Make each step small enough to accomplish in under 30 minutes, but significant enough to move your vision forward. Commit to these steps as sacred appointments with your desire. Chapter 19. The Communion of Intention. Everett stood before his community choir, his hands raised in the dim light of the church basement. Unlike professional ensembles, this group consisted of shopkeepers, teachers, and retirees, ordinary people whose individual voices often wavered with uncertainty. But Everett knew that within their scattered notes lay the potential for transformation. Each Tuesday evening he began rehearsal with the same ritual, a single pure tone that everyone matched. "Listen to each other," he would say. "Feel how your voice belongs to something larger." Slowly, through patient attention, the disparate voices would find their common center. One winter, as the town faced economic hardship and mounting tensions, Everett noticed how the choir's energy seemed to mirror the community's fragmentation. Rather than fighting this discord, he introduced a new practice. Before singing any notes, the group would speak their intended emotional quality in unison. Peace, they would say together, or joy, letting the word shape their breath and posture. He taught them to align their thoughts with their words, to feel the quality they named in their bodies before expressing it through song. What began as a simple exercise evolved into a powerful attunement. The choir learned to breathe as one organism, their voices becoming a single instrument of focused intention. Their weekly rehearsals took on the quality of a shared meditation. Everett guided them to match not just pitch and rhythm, but also the subtle frequencies of feeling. When someone's energy wavered, the group's coherence would gently draw them back into alignment. During a particularly tense town meeting about budget cuts, the choir was scheduled to perform. Instead of their usual repertoire, Everett led them in a simple hymn of hope. As their unified voices filled the space, he watched the rigid shoulders of audience members begin to soften. The charged atmosphere gradually shifted, making space for more constructive dialogue. The following week, several meeting attendees approached Everett about joining the choir. There was something different about that performance, they said. We could feel it changing the room. Everett smiled, knowing it wasn't just the music, but the coherent field of intention they had learned to create together. This is the power of unified intention. When speech, thought, and action align with unwavering clarity, they generate a magnetic force that draws reality into resonance. Like choir members finding their shared tone, we can learn to coordinate all aspects of our being into one coherent signal. The practice. Choose a single sentence that captures your deepest intention. For 7 consecutive days, precisely at noon, speak this declaration aloud. Feel each word resonating in your body. Align your thoughts with its meaning, and let your posture express its truth. Notice how this daily coherence begins to shape the field of possibilities around you. Chapter 20. Proofs and Portents. Hazel traced her finger along the faint lines of an old hiking trail, noting where seasonal streams had carved new patterns into the landscape. As a cartographer specializing in lesser-known routes, she had learned that the most reliable paths often revealed themselves through subtle markers, a cluster of weathered cairns, the way tree branches bent, or the texture of worn stone. One autumn morning, while updating a local trail map, she noticed 3 hikers had independently reported a curious landmark, a lightning-struck oak that seemed to point toward an unmapped valley. Initially, she dismissed it as coincidence, but when a 4th mention crossed her desk, something in her trained attention shifted. Most people saw mapping as a straightforward documentation of what existed, but Hazel knew it was really about pattern recognition, distinguishing meaningful indicators from random occurrences. She had developed a careful system. 3 independent confirmations warranted investigation. Emotional attachment to an outcome invalidated the signal, and each marker needed to build logically on the last. Following her protocol, she visited the oak tree, noting its position without expectation. There, she found signs of an old shepherd's path, barely visible but consistent with historical records she'd studied. Rather than immediately adding it to her maps, she spent 6 weeks testing the route in different weather conditions, documenting each journey with meticulous notes. The path proved to be a vital connector between 2 popular trails, cutting through a protected valley that offered shelter during sudden storms. Word spread among serious hikers, and soon Hazel's detailed maps of this new route were in high demand. Later, when asked how she discovered it, Hazel would explain that the path had always been there. She had simply learned to read the signs that pointed to its existence. The difference between a lucky guess and reliable navigation, she would say, is knowing how to verify what the landscape is telling you. The art of reading portents lies not in hoping for magical answers, but in developing disciplined attention to meaningful patterns. Like a cartographer distinguishing between random rocks and true trail markers, we must learn to separate wishful thinking from genuine signals of alignment. The practice. For the next 2 weeks, maintain a daily log of coincidences and potential signs. Classify each occurrence into 3 categories: clear signals, verified by subsequent events; background noise, random occurrences, or patterns to be tested later. Record the date, the potential sign, your initial interpretation, and any confirming or disconfirming evidence that follows. This practice builds discernment between true guidance and mere coincidence. Part 3. The Feast, Mastery and Manifestation. Chapter 21. Sovereignty of Appetite. Ira sat quietly at his desk, reviewing the proposed changes to his 8th grade civics curriculum. The committee wanted to strip away the hands-on community projects and replace them with standardized test preparation. Their reasoning was clear: better scores meant more funding, but something deep within him refused to yield. For 15 years, he had watched his students light up when they organized mock city council meetings and drafted their own bills. He had seen their pride when they researched local issues and presented solutions to actual community leaders. These weren't just lessons, they were transformative experiences that shaped active citizens. At the next faculty meeting, voices rose in practiced concern. The district average, state requirements, budget considerations. Ira listened respectfully, then stood. With calm certainty, he explained that while he understood the pressures, his classroom would remain a place where students learned citizenship by practicing it. His tone carried no defiance, only quiet authority. That evening, he wrote 2 sentences in his journal. "I am the sovereign guardian of this sacred space of learning. My classroom will remain true to the spirit of civic engagement." Each morning before school, he read these words aloud while standing tall at his desk, shoulders back, head high, a private ceremony that renewed his resolve. As weeks passed, something shifted. Other teachers began stopping by his classroom, watching how his students engaged with real-world civic challenges. A colleague from the history department asked to collaborate on a joint project linking historical movements to current community issues. The school counselor noted how many of his former students were taking leadership roles in high school. One day, the committee chair pulled him aside. Instead of criticism, she asked him to document his teaching methods. "We need to understand what makes this work," she said. "Maybe there's a way to measure what really matters." Ira's sovereignty hadn't come from fighting the system, but from honoring his inner knowing. By standing firmly in his truth, he had created a field that attracted others who shared his vision. The practice. Begin each morning with a 2-minute coronation ritual. Write a 2-sentence proclamation that declares your sovereign right to honor your deepest purpose. Stand in a power posture, feet planted, spine straight, chin lifted, arms either raised in victory or hands on hips, and speak your proclamation aloud. Hold this posture for 1 full minute, breathing deeply. Repeat daily for 7 days, noting how this practice affects your decisions and interactions. Chapter 22. The Anatomy of Receiving. Winifred stood in her beloved community garden, shoulders tensed as she stared at the pile of donated tools and seeds left by well-meaning neighbors. For years, she had maintained these plots through her own efforts, purchasing every trowel and packet of seeds herself. The sight of others' contributions made her chest tighten with an uncomfortable mix of gratitude and resistance. That morning, Mrs. Chen from the corner house had appeared with a box of heritage tomato seedlings. "From my grandmother's line," she had said proudly. Winifred's first instinct was to decline politely, but something in Mrs. Chen's eager expression made her pause. Taking a deep breath, she consciously lowered her shoulders and opened her palms. "Thank you," she had said, surprised by how the simple act of accepting shifted something in her solar plexus. The seedlings now sat in neat rows, their presence somehow making the garden feel more alive with possibility. Over the following weeks, Winifred practiced this new posture of receiving. She learned to inhale deeply when offers came, to soften her jaw, to let her spine align naturally instead of stiffening. Each time someone approached with a contribution, she reminded herself that gardens thrive on mutual nurturing. A retired carpenter offered to repair the weathered tool shed. Instead of insisting she could manage it herself, Winifred listened to her body's signals. When her shoulders began to rise, she consciously relaxed them. When her breath shortened, she deliberately lengthened it. "Yes," she said, "that would be wonderful." The repaired shed attracted more attention. A local nursery offered excess inventory. School children began bringing composting materials. Each gift required Winifred to practice the subtle art of receiving, the careful balance of gratitude and dignity, the physical stance of acceptance without grasping. One afternoon, as Winifred watched volunteers planting Mrs. Chen's now flourishing tomato varieties alongside donated herbs and flowers, she realized the garden had transformed. It was no longer her solitary project, but a living tapestry of community generosity. Her initial discomfort with receiving had given way to a deeper understanding that accepting others' gifts with grace created space for abundance to flow. The practice. For the next 2 weeks, establish an evening receiving ritual. Each night before bed, name one gift you accepted that day. Whether material, emotional, or spiritual. It could be as simple as a compliment, a moment of assistance, or a physical object. Sit quietly and feel the essence of this gift in your body for 30 breaths. Notice any tension or resistance and consciously soften around it, allowing yourself to fully receive. Chapter 23. Forbidden Desire as Catalyst. Barnaby hunched over his workbench in the pre-dawn hours, carefully assembling the final pieces of his alternative energy device. After 15 years in traditional engineering, he had developed something that challenged industry standards, a prototype that extracted power through unconventional means. The establishment had dismissed his early proposals as impossible, even dangerous. Their rejection only fueled his dedication. Late one night, while documenting his results, Barnaby received an unexpected email from a former colleague. Word had quietly spread about his work through trusted channels. Instead of broadcasting his findings or trying to force acceptance, he had shared selectively with a small circle of peers who understood the implications. "Your approach solves the exact problem we've been stuck on," his colleague wrote. "Would you consider a private demonstration?" The prototype, deemed too radical by mainstream firms, had gained an almost mythical status precisely because Barnaby handled it with such care. He never pushed it on skeptics or defended it to critics. Instead, he let the work speak through careful testing and documented results, shared only with those ready to engage seriously. Within months, a quiet network of interested researchers and potential partners emerged. The very qualities that made his innovation taboo, its challenge to accepted models, its unusual efficiency claims, created a magnetic pull when presented ethically and with appropriate boundaries. The prohibition had concentrated attention rather than dispersed it. Barnaby set clear terms for each demonstration, signed agreements, specific testing protocols, careful documentation of results. He never rushed to convince or defend it against skeptics. This contained approach paradoxically accelerated interest. Those who witnessed the prototype in action became its strongest advocates precisely because they had to earn access. One afternoon, while preparing for a small demonstration, Barnaby realized that the resistance he'd initially faced had become a gift. It forced him to refine and strengthen his innovation rather than rushing to market. The taboo around his work had cultivated a devoted audience rather than a scattered one. He decided to offer a limited trial to 3 carefully selected partners, The response was immediate. All 3 spots filled within hours. The scarcity created by his ethical boundaries had transformed industry skepticism into focused enthusiasm. Barnaby's experience revealed how taboo, when approached with wisdom and strong containment, could become rocket fuel rather than roadblock. The very forces meant to suppress innovation became the energy driving its emergence, but only when handled with respect for timing, boundaries, and ethical presentation. The practice. Over the next 2 weeks, identify one discouraged or taboo desire in your life. Create a detailed boundary plan for exploring it safely and ethically. Then take one modest, well-contained step to test the waters. Document the response and adjust your approach based on what you learn. Remember, resistance, properly channeled, becomes momentum. Chapter 24. The Dance of Surrender and Grasp. Lucille moved across the polished dance floor, guiding her newest student through the basic steps of the waltz. After 30 years of teaching, she had mastered the delicate art of alternating between firm direction and gentle allowance. When her student tensed and tried to anticipate the next move, she would strengthen her frame, providing clear structure. The moment she felt him relax into the rhythm, she would soften her hold, creating space for natural flow. Dancing is like life, she often told her students. You must know when to hold firm to your direction and when to release into the moment. One evening, a particularly frustrated businessman came for his first lesson. He gripped Lucille's hand too tightly, his shoulders rigid with determination to get every step perfect. Instead of correcting him directly, she maintained steady contact while gradually relaxing her own frame. As she softened, he unconsciously began to mirror her, his grip easing without losing the dance's structure. "Notice how the dance flows better now," she said quietly. "We're still moving toward our goal, but we're allowing the rhythm to carry us." Years of experience had taught Lucille that mastery lay in this constant alternation between holding and releasing. When students struggled with a sequence, she would provide firm guidance, clear steps, counted rhythms, defined movements. But the moment they began to find their feet, she would ease back, letting them discover their own balance within the structure she had established. During a showcase performance months later, Lucille danced with that same businessman, now transformed. They moved as equal partners, their steps flowing from moment to moment. When the music called for strength, they held firm together. When it softened, they allowed space for improvisation within the dance's framework. The audience watched in appreciation as they demonstrated this harmonious balance between structure and flow. Through their dance, Lucille embodied the fundamental truth she had discovered over decades of teaching. True mastery isn't found in rigid control or complete surrender, but in the rhythmic alternation between the two. Just as a dance requires both frame and flexibility, so too does the pursuit of any goal demand both unwavering intention and the wisdom to release into the moment's natural unfolding. The practice. Each morning for 1 week, find a quiet space and practice 10 rounds of breath polarity. Inhale and hold firmly for 5 breaths, maintaining clear intention and structure. Then release into 5 soft, flowing breaths, allowing gentle surrender. Notice how this rhythmic alternation between holding and releasing creates a dynamic balance in both body and mind. Chapter 25. Love, Lust, and Longing Distilled. Norman stood behind the counter of his small haberdashery shop, mesmerized by the latest fashion magazine featuring iridescent silk ties in neon colors. The wholesale catalogs promised these were the next big thing, and his fingers itched to place a substantial order. After 20 years in business, he still found himself chasing trends, hoping each new flashy collection would bring the success he craved. One afternoon, while reorganizing his stockroom, Norman discovered an old wooden box containing his grandfather's original measuring tools and fabric samples. Among them lay a simple black tie crafted from pure wool, its weave so precise it seemed to hold stories within its threads. He remembered how his grandfather had taught him to feel the quality of fabric between his thumb and forefinger, to close his eyes and let the texture speak. The difference between fashion and style, his grandfather had said, is the difference between a spark and an ember. That evening, instead of placing the order for trendy ties, Norman spent hours examining his existing inventory. He noticed how the synthetic blends that had seemed so promising months ago now hung lifeless on their racks, while the few classic pieces he stocked maintained their dignity and appeal. The next morning, a wealthy customer entered the shop, requesting the latest neon collection he'd seen advertised. Norman felt the familiar urge to accommodate, to chase the quick sale, but something made him pause. Instead of reaching for the catalog, he retrieved a charcoal gray tie woven from Scottish wool. "This might not catch every eye in the room," Norman said, "but it will earn respect from the ones that matter." He demonstrated how the fabric draped perfectly, how its subtle texture created depth rather than flash. The customer seemed skeptical at first, but grew quiet as he held the tie. "There's something about this one," he admitted, running his fingers along the edge. "It feels substantial." That interaction marked a turning point. Norman canceled his pending order for the trend-driven collection and instead invested in a carefully curated selection of timeless pieces. He began studying the heritage of different weaving techniques, learning to distinguish between momentary excitement and lasting value. 6 months later, when another fashion wave hit the industry, Norman felt the familiar pull of immediate gratification. But now he had developed a practice. Whenever a new trend emerged, he would wait 3 days before making any decisions. During this time, he would handle his existing quality pieces, reconnecting with their enduring appeal. The practice: for 30 days, implement the refinement test. When strong attractions arise, whether in business, relationships, or personal desires, wait 3 full days before taking action. During this period, maintain a journal comparing initial heat versus lasting depth. Note how the attraction feels on day 1 versus day 3. At the end of each waiting period, commit to following only one thread that demonstrates genuine depth rather than mere surface appeal. Chapter 26, Networks of Abundance. The small railway station had stood dormant for years, its side track overgrown with weeds and forgotten by most. But Pauline, the newly appointed station master, saw something others had missed. Where others viewed an abandoned siding as a relic of bygone days, she recognized a vital artery waiting to be reopened. One spring morning, Pauline began clearing the forgotten track. Her movements caught the attention of Marcus, a local farmer who'd been hauling his produce the long way around by truck. "What makes you think this is worth the effort?" he asked, watching her work. "Every connection matters," Pauline replied, continuing to remove debris. "This siding once linked 3 communities. The main line is fine for speed, but sometimes we need places where people and goods can pause, meet, exchange." Over the next few weeks, Pauline invested her early mornings in restoring the siding. She didn't just clear the track, she created a small shelter, added benches, and posted clear schedules. She contacted local vendors, suggesting how they might use the stop to coordinate deliveries. Rather than push for immediate commitments, she simply made the space welcoming and waited. The first sign of change came when Marcus began using the siding to load his vegetables. The shorter route meant fresher produce reaching markets. Soon, other farmers noticed. A baker from the next town started sending bread on the early train. A craftsman set up a small collection point for his woodwork. What began as simple logistics evolved into something richer. Travelers waiting for connections browsed local goods. Vendors met and formed new partnerships. The siding became a natural gathering point where commerce and community intertwined. "I never expected this," Marcus admitted one day, watching the morning's gentle bustle. "How did you know?" "I just opened the space," Pauline said. "The connections were always there, waiting to be restored. Everyone had something to offer. They just needed a place to offer it." The siding's success didn't come from aggressive promotion or forced participation. Instead, it grew through small reciprocal exchanges. When the baker offered fresh rolls to early commuters, they spread word of his bread in the city. When Marcus helped a stranded passenger with directions, that traveler became a loyal customer of his produce. Pauline maintained the space with subtle care, ensuring schedules remained reliable and the shelter stayed clean. She introduced people when it felt natural, but never pushed connections. She understood that true networks grow through trust and mutual benefit, not manipulation. Within 6 months, the siding had become an essential part of the local economy, not through grand schemes, but through countless small exchanges that benefited everyone involved. The practice of reciprocity had created a resilient web of relationships, each strand strengthening the others. Practice. For the next 30 days, choose 2 people in your network and offer them something of genuine value without expectation of return. This might be an introduction, a helpful resource, or simply attentive listening. Note how these small acts of service ripple through your connections over the following month. Chapter 27. Ethics of Taking What's Denied. The old vineyard had lain fallow for a decade, its twisted vines bearing silent witness to a complex history. Sheldon stood at its edge, facing the descendants of the family who had worked this land for generations before being displaced. He knew that simply purchasing the plot legally wasn't enough. There was a deeper reconciliation needed before the first grape could be harvested. "I want to listen," he said to Maria, whose grandfather had once tended these vines, about what was lost and what it would take to make things right. Over countless cups of coffee, Sheldon learned the story of the land and its people. He discovered how the previous owner had exploited a financial crisis to force out the workers who had made the vineyard thrive. Instead of rushing to replant, he took time to understand the wound that still ran through the community. Together with Maria's family, Sheldon drafted a restoration agreement. It included fair wage jobs for displaced workers who wished to return, profit sharing from future harvests, and a commitment to preserve traditional growing methods. Most importantly, it acknowledged the past while creating a pathway toward shared prosperity. When the first pruning began, it was Maria's father who showed Sheldon how to read the vines age in their bark, teaching him secrets passed down through generations. The workers brought their expertise, and Sheldon contributed modern sustainable practices, creating a blend of old wisdom and new knowledge. "A good wine," Maria's father told him, "carries the truth of its soil. If there's bitterness in the ground, you'll taste it in the grape." As the vines returned to health, Sheldon invited the neighboring families to participate in key decisions about the vineyard's future. They formed a council that met monthly, ensuring the venture's benefits flowed back into the community. When the first harvest approached, it was celebrated not just as Sheldon's success, but as a shared restoration. The core truth emerged clearly. True abundance couldn't be built on unaddressed harm. By taking time to repair relationships and create equitable structures, Sheldon hadn't just reclaimed a vineyard. He had helped heal a community's relationship with the land and its own legacy. Practice. Before proceeding with your desired manifestation, conduct an ethical scan. Map out all potential impacts on others. Invite honest feedback from one trusted voice who will challenge your assumptions, and design at least one concrete amendment to your approach based on what you learn. Complete this process within 1 week before taking your next step. Chapter 28. The Manifesto of Want. Marjorie stood before the empty bulletin board in the school hallway, a single sheet of paper trembling in her hands. For months she had carried a vision of transforming the neglected courtyard into a student-run garden sanctuary. Now, rather than pushing her agenda through conventional channels, she chose to share the dream itself. The notice she pinned up wasn't a proposal or a request for volunteers. Instead, it painted a vivid picture. Imagine stepping into a space where butterfly gardens bloom beside meditation benches, where science classes gather to study native plants, where stressed students find peace during lunch breaks. This is our courtyard's calling. She added no committees, no sign-up sheets, no demands. Just an invitation to see what she saw. Within days, something shifted. A biology teacher left a note about native plant sources. A meditation instructor offered to help design quiet spaces. Parents began dropping off garden catalogs in her mailbox. The dream had become a living thing, drawing people toward it naturally. Marjorie noticed how the specific imagery, butterflies, benches, studying students, gave others concrete ways to contribute. The vision's simplicity left room for collaboration without diluting its core intention. At the next PTA meeting, rather than presenting a detailed plan, she read the courtyard manifesto aloud. The room fell silent. Then a parent who had never spoken at meetings described how her landscaping company could donate initial plantings. A retired teacher offered to coordinate student volunteers. Each week, Marjorie returned to the bulletin board, adding small photographs of butterfly gardens and meditation spaces, carefully building the dream's tangibility while protecting its essence. She learned to share just enough to inspire while maintaining sacred space for the vision to evolve organically. 3 months later, as students planted the first butterfly bush, Marjorie understood that her role hadn't been to manage a project, but to midwife a shared aspiration into reality. The manifesto had created a field of possibility that others could step into freely, each adding their gifts to the whole. Core teachings show us that desire gains momentum when we transform it from private longing into shared declaration. By finding the precise language that bridges personal vision and collective benefit, we create a magnetic field that naturally organizes support. The key lies in crafting manifestos that invite rather than impose, that paint possibility while leaving space for others to co-create. Manifesto practice. For 15 consecutive days, read aloud a 1-paragraph declaration of your vision at dawn. Write it in present tense using sensory details and emotional resonance. Keep a daily log of coincidences, the subtle ways reality begins reshaping itself around your declared intent. Note external shifts, from unexpected offers of help to chance encounters that align with your vision. Chapter 29. The Practice of Mirroring Reality. Clyde checked his camera settings one last time before arranging the scene in the coffee shop window. With meticulous care, he positioned an antique typewriter beside a steaming cappuccino, scattered vintage postcards across the weathered wooden table, and adjusted the morning light falling through rain-misted glass. For weeks, he had been staging these small visual stories in public spaces around town, each one a carefully composed meditation on what could be. Before clicking the shutter, he sat with the scene, absorbing every detail, the rich coffee aroma, the gentle clatter of cups, the way sunlight caught the typewriter's brass fittings. He wasn't just taking pictures, he was rehearsing possibilities into being. Within days, something curious began happening. A local writer started bringing her own typewriter to the cafe. Others followed, drawn to the nostalgic ambiance. Soon, the coffee shop owner added a vintage writing corner, complete with weathered postcards for customers to send. For his next installation, Clyde arranged a chess set in the park, capturing early morning players deep in thought. Within weeks, informal chess clubs sprouted across public spaces. Each photograph seemed to plant a seed that reality eagerly nurtured into bloom. the core teachings reveal how inner mirroring works. When we create detailed sensory rehearsals, complete with sight, sound, smell, touch, and emotional tone, we recalibrate our nervous system to recognize and attract matching experiences. Through disciplined practice, our internal imagery becomes a reliable blueprint for external manifestation. 2-minute mental movies, rich in sensory detail, serve as powerful attractors. Body rehearsals, physically experiencing the feeling states of desired outcomes, anchor possibilities in cellular memory. Regular dissonance checks ensure our inner cinema aligns with authentic wanting rather than wishful thinking. As summer approached, Clyde set up his most ambitious scene yet, a community art wall with children painting murals. He spent hours getting the lighting right, arranging supplies, and capturing the joy of creative collaboration. Before taking the shot, he immersed himself in the vision, the sound of laughter, the smell of paint, the texture of brushes, the feeling of possibility. Within a month, a local arts organization approached the city about a youth mural program. By fall, that same wall bloomed with actual artwork, the scene nearly identical to Clyde's photograph. He realized his camera had become more than a tool for capturing reality. It was helping to shape it. The key lay in the detailed sensory rehearsal, the full-bodied imagination that preceded each shot. Every scene he staged first lived vividly in his mind, was felt deeply in his body, before manifesting through his lens and eventually in the world itself. Chapter 30. The Feast Begins. Esther stood before her bakery window at dawn, cradling the loaf she had spent years perfecting. The sourdough's golden crust bore a distinctive pattern, 3 waves intertwined with stalks of wheat, a design that had come to her in dreams. For months she had baked this bread only for family, testing and refining until each bite carried the perfect balance of tang and sweetness, crust and cloud-soft interior. Today she finally placed it in the window display. By mid-morning, passers-by began stopping, drawn by the unusual pattern. An elderly woman pressed her hand to the glass, recognition flickering in her eyes. "My grandmother made bread like this in the old country," she whispered. A young chef from the restaurant down the street stepped in to ask about technique. A mother with 3 children bought the whole loaf. Saying something about it reminded her of Sunday mornings from her childhood. The core teachings reveal that true manifestation carries responsibilities. Holding a rival with grace requires acknowledging all who contributed to the journey. Abundance must be thoughtfully allocated, some retained for sustenance, some shared to nourish others, some reserved for future growth. Teaching others transforms personal achievement into community legacy. Most importantly, keeping hunger as a living craft means treating each arrival as a doorway to deeper refinement rather than a final destination. That evening, Esther invited those who had been drawn to her bread to share a small feast. She demonstrated her technique to the young chef, while the elderly woman shared stories of traditional baking. The mother's children helped knead dough for the next day's batch. As conversations flowed, new possibilities emerged. A weekly bread-making circle, a collaboration with the restaurant, a program teaching children the basics of baking. What had begun as a personal quest transformed into a gathering point for community nourishment. Each person who had been drawn to her window now carried a thread of the story forward in their own way. The harvest was not just the perfected loaf, but the web of connections and possibilities it had spawned. The window display became a daily reminder that manifestation is not an end point, but a gateway. Each morning, as Esther placed fresh loaves beneath the early light, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a hunger well tended, one that continued to evolve and inspire rather than simply being satisfied and forgotten. For 7 days, gather in gratitude for one manifestation received. Share a portion of its abundance with others who might benefit. whether through teaching, giving, or creating opportunity. In your journal, record 3 lessons learned during the journey that will guide future desires. Conclusion. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the morning light and the small altar she had created, a candle, a journal filled with 31 days of practices, and a single red thread that had appeared on her doorstep the day she began this journey. As she completed her morning naming ritual, speaking her deepest want into the quiet air, she felt the difference between this declaration and those first hesitant whispers weeks ago. Her neighbor Sarah appeared at the garden fence, as she did most mornings, watching Evelyn tend to her herb spiral. Today, instead of just waving, Evelyn invited her in. "Would you like to learn something I've been practicing?" she asked, demonstrating the simple 3-breath ritual that had become her daily anchor. Sarah's eyes widened as she followed along, her shoulders dropping with each exhale. Later that afternoon, Evelyn visited the community center where her manifested writing program had taken root. Instead of rushing to expand it, as her eager mind suggested, she sat with the current participants, listening for ways to deepen rather than simply grow. She wrote a check for the cleaning staff who stayed late on workshop nights, acknowledging their unseen contribution to this dream's emergence. In her evening reflection, she noticed how the practices had become as natural as breathing. The morning naming, the ethical checks before taking action, the small rituals that kept desire clear and focused. Each manifested wish now carried its own protocol. Gratitude first, then repair where needed, followed by careful stewardship and mindful sharing. She understood now that this was no mere manifestation manual, but a living tradition that asked to be carried forward. Each person who learned even the smallest practice became part of an ancient lineage of those who had discovered how to transform hidden hunger into ethical, generative force. The red thread from her altar now wound around her wrist, a reminder of all who had walked this path before, all who would come after, and her role as both student and steward in this continuing ceremony of transformed desire.
If you enjoyed this exclusive audiobook, I handpicked this next book which will change your life.